We turn now to Pennsylvania Democratic Congresswoman Summer Lee. She joins us from Pittsburgh. Good morning to you, Congresswoman.
Good morning.
Our CBS polling shows that a majority of Americans, 59% of them, think the U.S. should encourage Israel to stop or decrease its military actions in Gaza. At the Democratic convention, Vice President Harris received loud applause for these remarks.
President Biden and I are working to end this war such that Israel is secure, the hostages are released, the suffering in Gaza ends, and the Palestinian people can realize their right to dignity, security, freedom, and self-determination.
Now, that is largely just restating existing U.S. policy. Do you think that's sufficient outreach to those who felt the administration hasn't expressed empathy?
I think that, I think people who are experiencing this, right, who are outside of the arena, who have been organizing since October, that is a step. But I think that what they really were asking for was, of course, the opportunity to speak for themselves. I think that, like all people, when you are experiencing something, you want to be able to tell your own story. And a lot of the people who, Palestinian American, Arabs and Muslims, were asking for that opportunity. So while, we all obviously believe that there should be a ceasefire immediately and permanently, and that Palestinians, just like Israelis, deserve the right to self-determination, we have to do more than just say that we believe that. We have to actually take steps that are going to evidence that, take steps that are going to show that we're willing to start to listen to people who have been outside of the political, I would say, conversation for so long. Yeah. It's been a third rail, and there's going to be a lot more work that we have to do to show to this demographic that the Democratic Party includes them in its big tent, includes them in our foreign policy considerations, and also includes them in our conversations around humanity and human rights.
You're talking about the decision at the DNC to deny anyone from the uncommitted movement or Palestinian American to take the stage. Congressman Ro Khanna tweeted, "It was a tragic mistake, perpetuating the erasure of the Palestinian story and voice." Why do you think Democratic leaders resisted it? And is it a self-inflicted wound?
I think that there has been, and I think that if you really look at this, long before October 7th, it was almost taboo to talk about Palestinians, to talk about the experiences that they have and that they continue to have in our politics. And I think that this was a continuation of it. To put on stage, first of all, I think it's important that we recognize that even the way we talk about the movement is in a way that sometimes is a little wide, is broad. It doesn't always take into account what folks are arguing about. I think that whether it's the Black Lives Movement or the movement for Palestinian rights, there's always this rush to say that their movement, the ways that they protest, the tactics, the strategies are inconvenient. And I think that that's just the way that we've done it, especially when we're nervous about a presidential election that we all know is incredibly important. Defeating Trump is the top concern, but we can do that, and we can also give space, create space for people, voices that are marginalized. We missed an opportunity to do that here. And in doing so, what we are essentially saying is that every Palestinian thinks the exact same way, that all folks who are protesting, who are voicing their concerns are one group and not individuals, not all folks who are coming with different perspectives. I think that there was room and space to say that there is room in the Democratic Party for that particular perspective as well.
This was a historic nomination of Vice President Harris as the first Black, first South Asian nominee of a major party. She's chosen really not to talk about the historic nature of that. Do you think that she should?
I think that it speaks for itself. I think that there is, zero chance that folks all across America do not recognize that she would be the first Black woman, the first South Asian woman in person to be not just our party's nominee, but hopefully our president. So to talk about it, it's almost a filler. I think that what they're doing and what they should be doing is talking about the issues, talking about the things that are not just unique to women, Black women, Asian women, but actually the things that make her qualified for the job. her resume, the policies that bring Democrats to vote, on November 5th.
Let's talk about those things.
Focus on. We all know there's history here.
Congresswoman, let's talk about those things on the other side of this next break. Stay with us. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We're continuing our conversation now with Congresswoman Summer Lee of Pennsylvania. Congresswoman, you were talking before the break about the need to focus on issues for the campaign. This past week, former Speaker Pelosi stated Vice President Harris will, quote, have to govern from the center because that's where the public is. I know you are a progressive Democrat. Do you think that this pivot to the center, particularly on issues like the border and immigration and crime, are they going to hurt support for the Harris-Walz ticket, or is it what's required?
Yeah. So I have to say, and I like to hope that we're able to do this. I have to disagree a bit. I think that we have data, we have polling, we have anecdotal evidence from Americans all over the country, but especially I'm in Pennsylvania, in a swing state, where we're not actually asking for our candidates to run away from progressive ideals. We're asking them for them to run to them. There's this idea that to say that having health care or an equitable education, or even talking about immigration reform in the border in a humane way is somehow to the left. But I think that that's what the average American wants. And I think that in very many ways, we've ceded ground to Republicans, especially around immigration. They have the tendency of talking about it in an incredibly fear-mongering and inhumane way. And I don't think that it's wise that we join them in that. I think people want to see us distinguish ourselves as a party. I think they want to see that we offer solutions for working class people, for marginalized people. And I think that we can do that vocally and proudly and still bring people to the party and not have them run away from it.
Okay, so that means you disagree with the Harris endorsement of the bipartisan border bill, which was a fairly conservative bill. And that's the policy stated for what the vice president would enact if she's elected.
I think that what I like to hope, I hope that what I think so many of us want to see, and not just progressives, I mean, even just Democrats, is that we can recognize that we need comprehensive immigration reform, that there are millions of folks in America who are impacted by this, folks who want to come here for a better life, who are looking for opportunities, and they are finding that the pathway, the window to achieving those opportunities is shutting, not opening. We know that in the past, there were systems in place that created an easier pathway for folks to attain citizenship, for folks to work, for folks to contribute. And that's what people want now. And I think that we need to be real about the solutions, what's driving folks to our border, and what's driving folks to want to make a life here in the United States at the same time.
All right, Congresswoman Lee, thank you for your perspective. For a slightly different one from a fellow Democrat, we are joined now by New York Congressman Pat Ryan. Good morning.
Hey, how are you doing, Margaret?
I'm doing well. You were at the DNC this week speaking on stage. You were one of the very first House Democrats to call out and publicly say Joe Biden needed to pass the torch. You're in a tight reelection race in Hudson Valley, New York. Do you think that having Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket makes it easier for you to win than if Joe Biden had stayed?
Without question. I mean, coming out of the DNC and for the last now month plus, we have just seen such energy, such enthusiasm, such true joy and optimism at a time when, even this morning in your coverage, it's a challenging, dark, and divided time. And that's what people in my district are desperate for. That is what we've been working on. When Kamala Harris talks about freedom, patriotism, reproductive freedom, economic freedom, freedom to breathe clean air and water, that is what folks, regardless of party, they want to believe in something, to be for something. And she has delivered that. And I think over the next 72 days, we're going to see that momentum continue to build.
The former speaker points to 5 seats in New York State as determining the difference between Democrats having a minority or majority spot in Congress. You are one of those seats. Do you think that now Democrats have a better shot at gaining the majority?
Yes,
no doubt. Definitely.
No doubt. It's just been a sea change. I mean, I won my last race by 1.3%.
Exactly.
Very attuned to what's happening in my district and talking to folks all day, every day. It has been just kind of putting rocket fuel into a jet engine and seeing blast off. It's so important, I think, to understand. It's one thing to be against a set of things,
Right.
but to be for a set of things and for core freedoms, that's rallying
Well, so
people.
then let's put this in specific terms, because some of the policies aren't that different from Joe Biden's policies. In fact, they're exactly the same on the border. And you, when you issued that statement calling for Biden to step aside, you called for him to restore order at the border. Your district has been hit with a lot of migrants being sent from New York City up to the Hudson Valley. What is any different about the Harris platform on the border?
I served 27 months in combat. I know what it means to secure a border. And I think foundational to the responsibilities of a nation state is to secure the border. That's not a partisan thing. That's a widely held view. So I did, call on and sort of call out President Biden in not doing enough.
But that was the Biden-Harris policy.
They've stepped up. And what we heard from Vice President Harris at the convention in her speech was exactly what folks in my district want to hear, which is we're going to secure the border, restore order at the border, but not lose who we are as Americans to welcome folks that want to come here, make a better life, serve our country, make it better and stronger. We can do both. We will do both.
So, but it's still not articulated as a different policy in the specifics. We haven't heard the vice president at least say things in detail. But on the issue of abortion, which is already protected in New York State, up to 24 weeks. After that point, it has to be that the mother's life is at risk for that procedure to be taken. But it's going to be on the ballot in some form or fashion in November. Do you think that this is just about driving up turnout?
The whole founding...
It's already protected.
The whole founding ideology of our country is about freedom. People don't forget that just 2 years ago, Trump's appointees to the Supreme Court ripped away a fundamental freedom. There have been more states across the country now taking away Americans' freedoms. You want to piss off the American people? Take their freedom away. And so this is not like a political thing. Again, this gets to the core of who we are. And so in New York, things like the Comstock Act that are on the books, outlined in Project 2025, even without congressional action, the hypothetical Trump administration says they can put in place essentially a backdoor national abortion ban. We are standing up against that as Democrats, really as Americans, though. And that will be a huge issue in my district.
Trump and Vance haven't been very clear on the Comstock Act. I asked J.D. Vance a lot of questions about it just a few weeks ago. Just to put that aside, though, I want to ask you about Afghanistan, because in your call for Joe Biden to step aside, you also pointed to that as a Biden-Harris problem. In fact, you said it was a strategic and a moral failure, that withdrawal. The vice president says she was that last person in the room on that decision. Is that failure also hers?
We've got to stop assigning partisan blame on fundamental things like our national security. I said it as an American. I said it as somebody who served in combat, who had friends that served in Afghanistan. If we can't make mistakes and wrestle with that with a little bit of space to do better in the future, how do we expect to continue on the next 250 years as this great country that we are? So we have to be, and I've called on presidents of both parties when I disagree with them on behalf of my constituents, on behalf of what I think is right for the country. So we have to be able to do that.
I bring that up because we are coming up on the 3-year anniversary of that withdrawal and that fatal attack at Abbey Gate, where 13 service people lost their lives in that ISIS-K suicide bombing. The family members of some of those service people took the stage at the RNC and said that President Biden hasn't spoken their names and how hurtful that was to them. Do you think the vice president should speak to that now, this week?
I'll let the vice president make her decisions about things like that. What I do think we need to recognize is, you want to talk about how we're speaking to veterans and military families. Just 10 days ago, Donald Trump got up and said, Medal of Honor recipients, the most revered heroes in our country's history. There's only 62 living Medal of Honor recipients in the United States. He directly denigrated and insulted them on top of years of insulting Gold Star families, calling our troops suckers and losers. That's something I spoke about at the convention. And I believe we're in a place where the Democratic Party is a party of patriots. Folks voting for Kamala Harris can feel that they are doing, and I certainly feel, their patriotic duty to bring our country together, stop insulting veterans and military families that have made the ultimate sacrifice. And Kamala Harris has done that and will continue to do that.
But it would mean something to those in your district if that loss was acknowledged this week.
Well, I think that it would mean a lot to the family members, of course, to acknowledge their loss. And we've lost far too many veterans, not just in active duty combat, but we've talked about this before, coming home. We've now lost more Iraq and Afghanistan veterans to suicide than we lost in active duty. So we need to properly fund the VA, another thing that Donald Trump failed to do. So these are important, stark choices ahead.
Congressman, good to have you here.
Thanks, Margaret.
We'll be right back. We go now to Republican Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt from Oklahoma City. Good morning to you, Governor.
Hey, good morning. Good to be with you.
So one of the biggest drivers of inflation right now are shelter costs. And I know in a previous life, you founded a mortgage business. So I want to tap into something that's also a problem in Oklahoma, and that is the housing shortage. Donald Trump was asked earlier this week when he was out campaigning in Nevada his plan, and he said he would like to release more federal lands to allow homes to be built. Is that sufficient?
Well, first off, thanks for having me on. I'll tell you this, as a businessman, before I became governor, I was in the mortgage business. And the last thing that you want to do is the Vice President Harris plan, which is to put $25,000 more into every single person's pocket for the purpose of buying houses. Because if you increase demand without fixing this, for first-time homebuyers, that's correct. But if you throw the demand side up without fixing supply, what happens to pricing? You're actually exasperating the problem. Prices for housing goes up. So the solution that President Trump's talking about, and it's the correct solution, is to eliminate permitting reform, get permitting reform, make it easier to developers, make it easier for people to develop and build houses, get rid of regulations. That's the free market principles that we believe in, and we know are the correct way to do it. I mean, when you think about it, listen, go ahead.
Sorry, the vice president said she also wants to create 3 million homes. So she is talking about adding to supply. But on the Republican Party platform, because we went to look at it, it says that Republicans will reduce mortgage rates by slashing inflation. That's really a Fed decision, right? But also open portions of federal lands to allow for new home construction. Sounds very much the same as the Harris plan. And then promote home ownership through tax incentives and support for first-time buyers. Also sounds very similar to the Harris plan. So what's different?
Well, first off, there are so many first-time homebuyer programs right now. And my question to you, and this is a great question for Vice President Harris, who's going to build the 3 million homes? Yeah. I mean, basically, we believe either in a free market system or we believe in government intervention. And so the bottom line is you're going to drive up the cost. The reason we have 20% inflation under a Biden-Harris administration right now is because of all of the attacks on energy, for example, the bureaucracy. We need permitting reform. We need deregulation. We need to unlock American businesses to meet the needs of Americans. Basically, when you have municipalities stopping new developments for lot sizes and for first-time home buyers, that's the things you need to do by increasing and throwing more money and giving, like, think about it for a second. This ticket, and I know Governor Walz, I'm friends with him in the National Governors Association. He's a nice guy. I've met Vice President Harris a couple times. She seems like a nice person. But if you think about the Democratic ticket, they've never worked in the private sector. And so their policies are showing that. You can't give every single first-time homebuyer $25,000 and expect the prices of houses to come down. That's just not the way the economy works. That's socialism. That's communism.
Well, yeah, it's not clear what the Republican platform means when they say tax incentives and support for first-time buyers. So it's not clear to what their detailed option is when they say also helping those first-time buyers. But on the economy, your state has a law that prohibits an increase of more than 10% for the price of goods and services during emergencies. The Harris campaign wants federal restrictions on those kind of price jumps. Why do you oppose it at the federal level if you have something at the state level?
Well, what we're talking about on the state level, if we have a natural disaster, for example, if there's a tornado that comes through one of our communities, we don't want out-of-state people coming in and price gouging as far as roofing, materials. So when I declare an executive order and say this area of the state has been hurt, it's for a short period of time. It's maybe for a month. And that's just to protect the people from really people coming in to try to make money off of this disaster. So that's totally different than what I see this administration, the Vice President Harris, recommending. So she's saying, here's the problem that doesn't make sense to the American people, and you need to question her on this. Okay, so she's going to tell grocery stores that the maximum you can pay for milk and charge for milk is $1.99. Well, what happens to the farmers if the costs are more than that?
Yeah.
Okay, what are they saying they're doing?
I would love to put those questions.
What's price control then?
I got you for a question. You are backing President Trump. Early on, you had supported the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, and he had warned Republicans about this.
You're not going to be talking about the border. You're not going to be talking about the economy. You're going to be talking about all these things to make the election a referendum on Donald Trump. Whereas, if I'm the nominee, we'll be solely focused on the issues that matter to the American people.
Is President Trump getting in his own way on his own messaging?
You know, I'm not going to defend what Vice President Harris said in the convention against President Trump or what President Trump is saying. This is not about winning an argument, and I think the American people are really tired of that. We have to get back to asking questions about policy, and Vice President Harris' policies have led to 20% increase in inflation. And I think the American people, at the end of the day, when they ask themselves, were they better off when President Trump was in office? The answer is going to be yes. And so President Trump's the nominee. He has the best policies, and I believe he's going to win in November.
Governor, thank you for joining us. We'll be back in a moment. And we're joined by former FDA Commissioner and Pfizer board member, Dr. Scott Gottlieb. Good to have you here. So this is a COVID summer surge. The CDC says we may be at the peak or about to pass it now. The Biden administration has just made free testing available. That'll come at the end of the month. The new booster shot was just approved. Is this just playing catch up here?
I don't think so. I think the timing's about right in terms of rolling out the vaccine and the tests that will be available for people in the wintertime. Look, we've had these summer surges and then a subsequent winter surge now a couple of seasons in a row. So I think we need to start to understand this is probably the predictable pattern for this virus for the foreseeable future. It's going to be hard to have a vaccine available earlier than they have had it this year. They've got the vaccine out earlier than they have in the past, in part to try to time it with the flu vaccine so that when people go into the pharmacy, they can get both a COVID vaccine and a flu vaccine, which I think is going to be important for a lot of older Americans. It is the case that we do see these summer surges, and we will have to think about how we protect people better in the future. I think the idea of having a dual vaccine, having 2 vaccines per year, that may be a difficult thing just from a manufacturing and a production standpoint.
So this booster is about KP2 variant.
Right.
KP3 is what is swirling around now, apparently. It will still protect you?
Yeah, so the data right now, it's preclinical data. So it's data looking at whether or not the antibodies that are produced as a result of getting vaccinated from KP2 will also neutralize this KP3 strain. That data looks encouraging, and we rely on that data, that neutralizing antibody data. We've historically relied on it, and it's been a good proxy for how effective the vaccine is going to be. So this vaccine should protect against KP3, about a third of the cases of KP3 right now. I don't believe that the winter surge, and we're likely to see a winter surge of COVID, is going to be from KP3. Right now, if you look across the country, COVID cases are starting to decline in most parts of the country. Perhaps the Northeast is still rising, parts of the West, states like Utah and Colorado. But we should be through most of this summer surge. Cases should start to continue to come down. And in what ultimately emerges in the wintertime, we don't know yet.
So when do you get it, the vaccine that is? And the guidance from the CDC is once your fever breaks, count 5 days and you're good to go. That's not necessarily going to stop transmission, is it?
Yeah, look, I think people who get COVID and recover from COVID probably should use an antigen test to see when they're no longer infectious. If you're still registering on an antigen test, you're likely still shedding some virus, although your infectivity probably has come down a lot when you're 5-6 days out. I think for Americans who are going into settings where there's people who are at risk, where they work in confined spaces, where people may be vulnerable, they may need to take some added precautions if they're recovering from an infection and still testing positive on the antigen test. There's no really, golden rule in terms of when people aren't infective anymore. If you want to be vigilant, use an antigen test to look for that. In terms of when to get the vaccine, for most Americans, getting it sometime in September, maybe early October, is going to be sufficient to try to protect them from that winter surge. I think a lot of Americans who are worried about the current surge, and there's still a lot of virus around, could go out and get the vaccine right now because they could still catch COVID from this current wave of infection. For people who've been infected, they likely have several months of good protection from that recent infection. So they may want to wait a little bit longer. That way, when they do get vaccinated, maybe late October, that vaccine will extend further. Because we know that the immunity provided by the vaccines only lasts a defined period of time, 3, 4, 5 months.
And it's a serious strain. I'll say that. The CDC said that they saw a high number of children under 5 going to the ER. Why are kids being impacted like that?
Well, part of that is that kids don't have baseline immunity. So a lot of adults have baseline immunity. So when you look at the statistics on who's going to the emergency room, overall about 2.4% of all emergency room visits are for COVID right now. But for the cohort over the age of 65, that's about 3.4%. So 3.4% of all people over the age of 65 who go to the emergency room for any reason are going there for COVID. In children under the age of 5, it's 5.8%. So a higher proportion of kids who go to the emergency room are going to the emergency room for COVID. They're getting sick because they don't have baseline immunity. They haven't been infected before. They haven't been vaccinated. I think part of it's also that parents are more likely to take a sick child to the emergency room than take themselves to the emergency room. So that's some of what's baked into that.
It's hard to get a kid vaccinated, though.
It's hard to find a place that vaccinates toddlers. So if you think of CVS, for example, most of their pharmacies won't vaccinate toddlers. It's only the pharmacies that have minute clinics. A lot of pediatricians don't stock the under 5 vaccine because a lot of parents aren't asking for it. If your pediatrician doesn't have the vaccine, you want to vaccinate your child, you can ask them to order it, and it should be available within 24 to 48 hours.
All right, Dr. Gottlieb, I have so many more questions for you, but we have to leave it there for right now. We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. Until next week. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.